Today I want to examine why you Chinese students behave the way you do. Okay? So believe it or not, but the way that you behave, the game that you're playing, it's strange, it's weird. So I'll point out 3 things that you do that don't really make any sense. The first thing that you do is you spend a lot of your time learning English. In fact, you probably spend more time learning English than you do learning Chinese. That's weird. And I've asked Chinese students before why they are so focused on learning English. And their answers usually are, I want to learn knowledge, I want to go abroad, I want to communicate, I want to use the internet. But that's not really a good explanation, okay? So that's one thing that's weird. Second thing that's weird is you're obsessed with making money, especially US dollars. Okay, and the third thing that's weird is that your goal in life is to immigrate to a Western country, specifically the United States, right? You all want to go to the United States for college, get a degree, and hopefully stay there, get a good job. But as we discussed before, that's strange because you are much higher status in China. You're much more likely to get a good job. You're much more likely to marry a beautiful woman than you are in the United States, where the game is rigged against you. Okay, so this sort of behavior is weird. If you think about it, what you should be really trying to do is master Chinese. Because once you master Chinese, and given your family background, given the fact that your family is often wealthy and well connected in China, you can climb up pretty high in China, okay? So if you learn Chinese, you're far better able to communicate yourself. You're far more likely to gain respect and status in China, okay? But instead you learn English. US dollars doesn't make any sense. What you really want is status. Right? What you really want is to be well respected. You want a prestigious job. You want to marry a beautiful woman. You want to have lots and lots of children. That's what you really want. But instead, you're really focused on obtaining US dollars. That's kind of strange. Now, the last thing we said was immigration. If you go to the United States, it's really a rigged game against you, right? The most that you can hope to obtain is maybe become an engineer or professor if you're really, really smart, but you're not going to achieve political power. You're not going to become a CEO of a major company, all right? So the situation as it is, it's really weird where the best and brightest in China, they just want to be common people in the United States or Britain or Canada. So it's a really weird game. And so the question I want to look at today is, how was this game constructed? Why do we play this game? And the answer I will show you is because of the British. Okay? The British Empire created this game that ultimately the Americans inherit, and which the entire world's played today because America is the global superpower. Okay, does that make sense? All right, so first I want to go into some history and explain to you how we got to where we are. So this is the map of the Spanish Empire at the height of its power. As you can see, the Spanish Empire covered the entire globe, okay? So this is a small nation in Spain, and it was able to really cover the entire world. So how was this accomplished? Okay, so the first thing you need to understand is that for most of its history, Europe was a very poor place. In order for it to obtain wealth, it had to trade with the world. Specifically, it wanted spices from what they call the East Indies, okay, Southeast Asia. At this time in history, the main power were the Muslims who are here, okay? And if you want to trade with East Asia, you have to go through the Muslims. And at this point in history, Spain is Muslim. It's a place called Andalusia. But then the Christians were able to reconquer Spain. And so the Muslims decided that, we'll just blockade you. Or if you want to trade with us, we will charge you a lot of levies. Okay? And so now the Spanish and the Portuguese are forced to look for new routes to the East Indies, where the spices are. Remember, at this time in history, spices are the most valuable commodity. They're actually worth more than gold. Okay? I'm talking about like cinnamon, nutmeg, peppercorn. Okay? These spices are extremely valuable commodities. In fact, one ship, if you're able to bring one ship of these spices back to Europe, well, you had intergenerational wealth. Okay? You become one of the wealthiest people in Europe. That's how valuable these spices were. And so now, the Spanish and the Portuguese have no choice but to discover new routes to the East Indies. So they went this way, and this is hard because Africa is not really hospitable. There are a lot of viruses, diseases in Africa. So they started to explore all around the world, and they went to North America and South America. And when they went to North and South America, they discovered that there were already peoples, the Aztecs, the Incas, living there. And they had a lot of wealth because these were empires, and they could be easily conquered. And so they set up these colonies all around South America, and a lot of silver was now being transported back to Spain. And so overnight, Spain became extremely wealthy. But as we discussed last class, if you become too wealthy and too powerful, you change as a people. Before you were energetic, you were open, you were cohesive. That's what made you an empire. But now because of all this wealth, you become insular. You become arrogant. And you become extremely close-minded. Okay, you become lazy. And so the Spanish, they had all this wealth, and they decided that they really want to work anymore. Okay, so what happened? Well, what happened was that they started to subcontract their labor to other places. Okay, so now what's going to happen is you will have the rise of England, French, and the Dutch Republic. Mainly, okay, to provide textiles, luxury goods to Spain, all right? So how this was accomplished was first, industry. So the Spanish, because they were so wealthy, didn't want to work. And their people didn't have to work either, okay? So, but they wanted to buy clothes, nice clothes. So what happened was they got other nations to be their factories, including Britain, the Dutch Republic, and France. Okay, that's the first thing. Second thing that happened was trade. Okay, so the Spanish did engage in trade, but now that they're so wealthy, they could just hire the Dutch to do it. Okay, now the Dutch were responsible for going to the East Indies and bringing back the spices because it's a very dangerous job. Right? You could get sick, you could die along the way. You could also lose a lot of money. Okay? And the reason why the Dutch agreed to this is that the Dutch was basically a colony of the Spanish. So the Spanish had an empire, and the Dutch were part of this empire, so they just made the Dutch go do it for them. Okay? But the third thing that happened was piracy. Okay? So all this silver was being transported from the New World back to Spain. And what the English realized is, hey, we can just engage in piracy and steal this silver for ourselves. Okay? All right, so now the English became very wealthy because of piracy. Okay, and the most famous pirate of this time, of course, was Sir Francis Drake. And he worked directly under the monarch, Elizabeth I. Okay, so this was a state-sponsored piracy that made Britain very wealthy. Okay, so now you have this divergence where, okay, you have the Spanish Empire, and because of their wealth, they became lazy, insular, and arrogant. Or the word we use is hubris. Okay, lazy is you just make others do it for you, okay? Insular just means that now, as we discussed last class, the Spanish aren't concerned about other nations. They think they're invincible, so they engage in court politics. Okay? They're all infighting for the throne. The last thing is arrogant hubris, which basically means that you believe you are invincible. You can do whatever you want, and therefore you start all these wars against everyone, everywhere. You overextend yourself, and you don't really understand your limitations as an empire. So very quickly, even though Spain becomes very wealthy very fast, they also go bankrupt very fast because they're fighting too many wars, they're spending too much money that they don't have. Okay, and they're too corrupt. Okay, does that make sense? Now, and because of this, what's happening is that the British, England, the Dutch, and the French, they are slowly becoming a much more energetic, open, and cohesive society. Cohesion, okay?